The Heat are still in first place in the East, but there are still questions about this team that need answering. Miami's late game offense has been a concern. So how will it translate over the next 10 games? Is Jimmy Butler going to be healthy enough to be stupidly locked in? And what's the latest linking Miami to Bradley Beal? We'll answer all of this and more on today's episode of Locked On Heat.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, Heat Nation. It's a Wednesday edition of Locked On Heat, your daily podcast covering all things Miami Heat, however you may be listening on YouTube, Odyssey, or on your favorite podcast app. Thank you so much for making us your first listen every day. I'm David Ramil, and I'm with my co-host, as always, Wes Goldberg. Miami is 47-25, 2.5 games over three different teams, but after a tough loss in Philadelphia, it seems like every Heat fan is panicking just a bit. So on this show, we'll talk about Jimmy Butler and some potential health concerns. We'll look at late game offense that has been a problem for Miami mostly all season long, and how some tweaks to the rotation might change that for Eric Spoelstra and his offense. But we'll start off with the latest report from The Athletic and Shams Charania, who went on to talk about Bradley Beal in a piece that was published on Tuesday about Bradley Beal and knowing exactly how he has committed to Washington and that this summer was a big one for him because he's set to sign an extension for $200 and some odd million. And yet, according to Charania, the Heat are seen, this is a quote, the Heat are seen as a legitimate suitor for Beal should he elect to seek a new home. Multiple sources said the Heat have a veteran championship-ready core in Jimmy Butler, Bam Adebayo, Kyle Lowry, and Victor Oladipo and PJ Tucker, as well as talented young players in Tyler Herro, Max Strus, and Caleb Martin. Miami would need to complete a sign and trade to acquire Beal. Overall, teams will continue to keep an eye on the Heat as a legitimate threat to add talent in the years to come. Well, Wes, obviously we know that Miami likes to acquire superstars whenever possible, but when it comes to Bradley Beal and the pursuit of Bradley Beal, frankly, I'm calling BS on this. I'm not sure exactly what Charania's goal here is, just rather than to, the trade deadline's passed. There's no activity for a few months now until the season ends. And so he's kind of just stoking the fires a little bit, but I'm not exactly sure why he felt the need to bring up Bradley Beal's name right now. Like, he framed it in his piece as, had a healthy Bradley Beal been available during the trade deadline, maybe things would have been different across the NBA landscape. That Philadelphia might have tried to trade for Beal instead of acquiring James Harden. Who knows, right? It's also theoretical on his part, and he's just like throwing darts at and seeing what sticks.
I mean, it is a big name. Bradley Beal is a big name. He's still one of the best scorers in the NBA. We're only a year removed from him, being right there with Steph Curry for the scoring title last season. He's a guy who's near, always at the top of the league or near it in true shooting percentage and all these things. Just an incredibly talented scorer, perennial all-star. So I understand why Shams and these sort of, beginning of the week type of pieces that he posts basically every week at The Athletic. It's sort of just the deal, right? Like, he just kind of puts together all these rumors and puts them in one big piece for The Athletic. I will say, and this is not doubting Shams' reporting, I believe that rival front offices do believe that the Miami Heat are the front runners for Bradley Beal. But I also think that rival front offices believe that the Heat are the front runners for Bradley Beal because we've been talking about Bradley Beal going to the Heat for like half a decade now. Yeah, and so I just think I think that sometimes we just give too much credit to rival front offices, especially when those rival front offices don't have any more insight to what the Heat are planning to do than anybody else, than you or me, than Shams, And so
I'd wager that we might have more, honestly.
Yeah. And so just wake me up when the report is the Miami Heat's front office is having internal conversations about putting everything on the table to acquire Bradley Beal. That's a report that would really get me excited. Right. In one way or the other, but at least something that would kind of stand out as something real, where, again, I don't doubt Shams' reporting. I just push back against the importance of it, how big of news this is. This is, to me, a little bit of clickbait, if I'm being completely honest.
100%.
So
This is like the Orlando Magic GM saying, "Well, hey, Miami could always grab Bradley Beal." I was like, "Oh, okay." That's another rival GM saying Miami could get the Beal. It's like, yeah, no kidding. Miami can pretty much have a meeting with almost any star player. And yes, the link has been there for a long time. That doesn't make it any more realistic or likely to happen this summer than it has been over the last 5 summers.
It does bring up the interesting conversation, though, and I think it's one that we could have again. I know that we've been having the Beal conversation for, again, like half a decade, but we had it earlier in the year. I can't really remember when. Maybe it was a little bit before the trade deadline. But now that we've only got 10 games left in the season, and it looks like Tyler Herro is on his way to claiming 6th man of the year here, and I would be very surprised if he didn't win it this season. I think everybody would. But, Tyler Herro would have to be the centerpiece of any Bradley Beal trade. There's no way to acquire Beal without including Tyler Herro, right? Washington would ask for Tyler Herro, and the Heat would have to oblige in order to land Bradley Beal. The question is whether they should, right? And I think when we go back,
I can answer that.
I mean, I think I'm with you. The answer right now is no, right? But it is interesting to have that conversation because, again, you look at what Beal did last year, and it's really hard. It's really easy to forget. I mean, 30 points a game on like 58% true shooting, another all-star campaign. And by the way, as the leading scorer for Washington, Tyler Herro right now putting up great numbers, but we're talking about 21 points a game off the bench compared to Beal, 30 points while facing the other team's best defender every single night. That is a big difference in score. Bradley Beal is the better player right now than Tyler Herro is, but that's not really what we're talking about here when we're having that conversation about a trade. Let me read you some numbers about Bradley Beal at 22 years old versus Tyler Herro at 22 years old. So here's Beal at 22. 17.4 points per game on 44.9% shooting overall, 38.7% from three-point range, and 2.9 assists a game, okay? So that was Beal. Tyler Herro now at 22 years old, 20.9 points per game, 44.4% field goal percentage, 39.1% from three-point range, 3.8 assists per game. Herro is averaging more points, roughly the same overall field goal percentage, slightly higher in three-point percentage overall, and almost one more assist per game. Now, we could parse starters, bench, all these things, but the minutes are right there. Tyler Herro plays a lot of his minutes against opposing starters and against the opponent's team, the opponent's best defender. Tyler Herro is on track to have just as good of a career as Bradley Beal if you just look at these numbers. And you would and you have to imagine, like, the big thing is Beal's field goal percentage after this age 22 season basically goes from 45% to 47, 48% every single year. That's the kind of leap the Heat will need Tyler Herro to make. He's made a huge leap this year. He needs to make another one in efficiency. But if you think that he's going to end up getting the starting job next year, playing off of Kyle Lowry, Jimmy Butler, Bam Adebayo, I would bet that shooting percentage jumps, right? Because now he's not having to create everything and take all these tough shots and bailing out that second unit offense as much as he does if he's playing next to all the Heat's best playmakers all the time. So I think that Tyler Herro is on a Bradley Beal-like trajectory, and I would not include him in a deal for Bradley Beal at this point, considering all that you would have to give up, which would be Tyler Herro, probably more salary, likely Duncan Robinson, and then all these draft picks that they have available over the next 7 years.
I agree with everything you're saying. I think Beal is the better player. And I don't also think that it's that much of a leap either. Like, I don't think it's that big a gap or sizable a gap between what Tyler is this year and what Bradley Beal is. Like, if you put Bradley Beal on this team, would he thrive the same way that Tyler has? Would he be able to bail out the offense? It would be completely different, right? Just think of it from that perspective. You'd have another elite scorer there, another go-to option, presumably again in the starting lineup. And then you have to consider the trickle-down effect. He'd shoot well, like you said, his numbers would probably go up. He'd be a boost to the offense when it gets bogged down. Who do you defend when you have Lowry or Butler or Adebayo out there? Somebody would have
to late game offense. You give it to Bradley Beal. At least you know.
Yeah. But at the same time, then what happens with those second units there? Like, is there somebody on the bench that could stand up? Would Miami be able to find some other dime in the rough to be able to contribute at a high level? How would you stagger rotations? We've seen Beal get hurt a number of times over the last few seasons. We see Jimmy Butler, who we'll talk about later on the show, constantly battling an injury. We've seen Bam Adebayo, even at his prime, still looking to fight his way through injury earlier in the season. I don't know. Even as I'm thinking about it,
would it even narrow the gap at the top of the East? Would trading everything you have? Like, there's an opportunity cost that comes along with a trade like that, right? When, again, it's Tyler Herro, bunch of salary, every draft pick that you could possibly trade. You have no other means to land an all-star, a superstar type of player, right? If you're moving all of that stuff now for that superstar who you think is Bradley Beal, does that make if you just swap all that stuff, Tyler Herro and Duncan Robinson, let's call it that, and then whatever draft picks, but Tyler Herro and Duncan Robinson on this team, you swap those two players for Bradley Beal. Is that team better than the Bucks next year with a healthy Brook Lopez? Is that team better than a fully formed and healthy Brooklyn Nets team with Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving able to play every single game, Ben Simmons in the fold? Is that team better than those teams? I would say probably not. Not shoulders over those teams. So my thing is, if you're going to make a move like that, if you're going to put all the chips in the middle of the table, then you better be confident that that move is making you the favorite in the Eastern Conference. Because if you don't, not only are you using all those picks and you're losing all the depth like that you were talking about, but you're also basically missing on any opportunity of getting the next disgruntled superstar, right? If you do it all for Bradley Beal, then you got no money left for, superstar X who might become available and could put you head and over heels over those other teams. And so it's just, from all you look at it from every single angle, and I actually have a hard time finding a reason to try to trade for Bradley Beal. Now, if he becomes a free agent in a couple of years and there's enough cap space and Miami could figure it out the way they figured it out with Kyle Lowry this past summer, that's a different conversation. But when you're talking about all the resources, chips in the middle of the table type of trade, I have a hard time finding a reason to do it.
Yeah, I'm torn. Like, honestly, I came into this show thinking about, no, there's no way. Like, Tyler is young, he's cheaper, his contract he's going to turn into a similar player as Beal. And yet now, in having this conversation and thinking about the way that he does things, I almost get the feeling that they would be interested in making this deal, like a lot more than I had previously thought. I don't know why. I honestly did not expect this, so apologies to everybody, but I'm changing course in the middle of the show here because now I'm thinking about it. I don't know. It seems like the win now move that appeals to this front office a lot more than it probably appeals to you and I, just because, well, the window with Jimmy Butler is closing. I think we've seen what he's done this year, and as great a player as Jimmy is, and it does, it pains me to say this, I just don't know how long he's going to be able to stay at this peak, given his health concerns and everything else. And I know we'll talk about that a little bit later on the show, but in context of Bradley Beal, you're acquiring Beal not just to, in actuality, replace Tyler Herro, but you're also acquiring Beal to become the team's go-to superstar when Jimmy Butler can no longer be that player, even with his sizable contract and everything else. And Miami wants to set themselves up for that kind of future where there's not that significant a drop-off. When Jimmy's numbers start declining, as they surely will, then Bradley Beal will be relatively in his prime, assuming he can stay healthy and that he can develop some level of higher defense than he has in Washington right now. And then he can be the go-to star alongside Bam Adebayo and whoever else can fill in the gap at some point, because Kyle will be older, Jimmy will be older, etc.
I mean, he's 28 right now. He'll be 29 next year. I'm not saying it's impossible for Pat Riley in this front office to make that kind of swing. I just wonder if they want something bigger, because there are defensive concerns with Bradley Beal. He's not a good defender. He hasn't really showed any interest in being a good defender throughout his career. I think this is a conversation we can continue having in the next segment.
Absolutely. Well, we'll talk about that in the next segment alongside the other bigger picture regarding Jimmy Butler, because we have some concerns, or at least I do, as you well know. If you've been listening to the show for some time, you know how I feel about Jimmy and also about the potential of a long-term concern throughout the playoffs regarding his health. But before we do that, just a reminder that this show is brought to you by PrizePicks, daily fantasy made easy. And easy is really what they're all about. As fantasy props and pick'ems get more popular, PrizePicks is making it easy for you to play. They do that with the best NBA DFS prop game on the market, offering more NBA props than any other DFS prop operator. PrizePicks offers any prop you can think of, from points scored to rebounds and even steals. And check out the PrizePicks Power Play. Here's how it works. You predict the over-under on a player's fantasy production, and you can win up to 10 times on any entry. It's just you versus the projected fantasy totals. PrizePicks even allows mixed sports entries. You can do, college basketball and the NBA at the same time. And for a limited time, PrizePicks has an exclusive offer, a no-brainer for all of our users. They get $50 for free if a player in your first PrizePicks entry scores even a single point, but you must use the code NBA. That's right. This is an exclusive offer available to Locked On fans. Sign up today and use the code NBA, $50 for free if a player in your first PrizePicks entry scores a single point. Do it all using the award-winning app on the Apple App Store and Google Play. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's that easy. Plus, PrizePicks is safe and offers fast withdrawals. Don't hesitate. Check out prizepicks.com and use the promo code NBA, or go to your app store or download the app today. PrizePicks is daily fantasy made easy.
Thank you for making Locked On Heat your first listen. For your next listen, check out the Locked On Now podcast, nightly recaps of every NBA game with analysis from our local experts. It's free and available wherever you get your podcasts. David, just to wrap up the Tyler Herro segment here, because I think what you hit on at the end there, that you would think that this front office would do this sort of thing.
Yeah.
Again, I'm still not convinced that Bradley Beal is
the guy.
Is the guy. So who would be the guy, right? Because I still believe that if the Heat are going to if the Heat don't win the finals this year, if they fall short of their own expectations, right? I do think that there's some potential for a major shakeup. Like, Pat Riley is not somebody who is patient. We all know what his goals are, sooner rather than later. And I think you're right. What you hit on with Beal, somebody young enough who can sort of still take the baton from Jimmy Butler, but also make sure that this team has an opportunity while Jimmy Butler is still in his extended prime, while Kyle Lowry is still doing his thing and everything else. So I basically have been asking this question all season long. Who is the worst player that I would be willing to trade Tyler Herro for? Bradley Beal at this point, or I should say at the beginning of the year, that would have been a discussion where I would be like, you know what, I can kind of go either way on this. Right now, there's no way I would move Tyler Herro for Bradley Beal. No chance. It's just, that's not good enough of a player to move Tyler Herro and all the other stuff that it would take. But like Beal, like, what is he? A top 30 player in the NBA, somewhere around like 25, 27.
Yeah.
I made a list here, and we could basically just go down it really quick. Like, we don't have to spend a ton of time on this, but like, first, Kevin Durant, yes. Giannis, yes. Jokic, yes. LeBron, yes. Embiid, yes. Steph, yes. Kawhi, yes. Luka, yes. Right? Like, we're in agreement. Like, if it's Tyler Herro straight up for any of those guys, you do it, right?
Sure.
Okay. Anthony Davis.
No.
Okay, not for this team because you have Bam in a vacuum. Yeah, probably, right? Okay. Chris Paul, same sort of deal, right? If there's no yeah. Damian Lillard, yeah, right?
Yeah.
Karl Anthony Towns.
Interesting option there.
Yeah. I mean,
I think so.
He's a perfect fit next to Bam too. Could you?
Yeah.
But yeah, I would move Tyler Herro for Karl Anthony Towns, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Jason Tatum.
Yes.
Yeah. James Harden is a weird one. I don't really know. I probably wouldn't because he's older. He's clearly showing signs of aging, and he's kind of, I don't know that he fits the Heat culture and all the off the court stuff, and the fact that he likes to change teams every year doesn't really. I
did this a lot over the offseason. I went through this a lot. And yes, the answer is still yes. Like, the Heat front office, I don't think they would bat an eye at the opportunity to acquire James Harden.
Fair enough. Jimmy Butler, that's, a moot point. This is my order of best players in the NBA. Devin Booker. Yeah, you probably would do it. Or do you disagree?
No, I do.
Oh, okay. All right.
I agree
with me. Okay. Kyrie, again, mandate stuff, everything.
No, probably not.
You would not trade.
I don't think the Heat would.
Okay. So that's kind of where we're stopping. Ja Morant?
Yes.
Okay.
Youth, potential, everything else. Yeah, I think that's.
Yeah, I had a hard time deciding whether or not Ja Morant or Kyrie Irving was the better player. So then we get into sort of the Paul George, Rudy Gobert, Like still no, right? Or would you trade Tyler Herro for those players?
For Paul George is really good, and I think we've kind of
I might
overlooked
have,
that because
I might have him too
because
low.
no, I mean that's fair. Look, the injury concerns, the concerns about whether he can carry a team, the playoff P, pandemic P, and everything else. Like it's easy to mock, and there's the image of him in the Indiana Pacers and not being able to carry that team. And look, I mean, as a Heat fan, I'm sure a lot of people would hate the idea of Paul George on this team. The reality is he's still a pretty good player defensively, offensively. He can shoot the ball really well. He's still long enough to attack. He's recovered and rebounded from injury, and he's right in that kind of prime. Still hungry
been in like
for a
the
title.
top 5 MVP conversation in voting like every year, basically
kind of a
since
no-brainer.
This lone season in OKC. He was sort of in that fringe kind of top 10 MVP conversation before he got hurt this season when he was carrying the Clippers without Kawhi. Paul George, I'd probably do it for. Rudy Gobert's a weird one because he's so defensive oriented, and obviously the Heat have Bam, but sort of in a vacuum, you would have to consider Tyler Herro for Rudy Gobert. I think, but again, both of those players are so. One, Tyler Herro leans so offensive shot creation. Right. Gobert leans so. It would be more of like, what does your team need?
You're redefining exactly what this team does. Like the very identity, you're leaning totally into a defensive-minded team. I don't think.
But I guess if you were to be like, hey, start from zero, you could build your team around Rudy Gobert or Tyler Herro. You would pick Gobert, probably.
Yeah.
I mean, that's you get Gobert, you have a top 7 defense.
Heat fans are going to think we're crazy. I can already see the comments right now. I think there's a lot of league-wide disrespect for what Gobert does, and maybe they don't watch a lot of Utah games, and I totally understand why their offense is slow and boring, and I totally get that. Gobert is a really, really good defensive player. And
he is limited. He is limited. Yeah. There's a reason why Utah bows out in the playoffs before they won 2 every single season. I think I think the point is we're at the point now where we're around like the 20th, 21st best player in the NBA, who's still relatively young, and in Rudy Gobert's case, very much in his prime. Yep. And now we're starting to have the conversation, as opposed to, when we're talking about Luka and Giannis and like, obviously, yes, you would
obvious players. Yeah.
Trae Young, Donovan Mitchell, Drew Holiday. I know that Trae Young and Donovan Mitchell are obviously younger. I think if in a vacuum, you probably removing Tyler Herro for those guys, given what you have to give up, though. I think then you start to have a little bit of a harder conversation about it. Is it worth everything that you have?
I think that's a trigger you pull pretty quickly.
I think for Mitchell you would. Trae Young, I still don't know what to. I don't know what he looks like on a team with other good players. DeMar DeRozan, no, I wouldn't do it because of the age. Drew Holiday, same thing. Bradley Beal, now we're in that conversation. So I don't know if we have any conclusions. I just thought that was a worthwhile exercise. It's kind of funny where we are now, where we're kind of like hemming and hawing over like the 20 to 25th best players in the NBA.
Yeah.
Right. And that's sort of that bar now, I think, for what it would take to move Tyler Herro.
I'm experiencing like major deja vu as we're talking about this. And I feel like there's this question that's brewing in my head that I feel I've asked before. Would you trade Tyler Herro for Jimmy Butler? If Jimmy Butler was playing elsewhere, would you trade Tyler Herro for Jimmy Butler?
If my goal is to win a championship as soon as possible, yes.
Interesting. I mean, this is the conversation, right? Like we have to consider. Look, Tyler Herro is fantastic as a player. We've talked about him all season long. He's a very good scorer, young, lots of potential, and maybe there's going to be creating a divide there. But Beal is also a very good player. There are concerns about his health. There are concerns about his defense. He's not a very big player. There's no more upside to him. He's already reached his potential. I think he can be. If he's acquired by Miami, whether it's next season or whatever, it's all about fine tuning. And you brought up a great point earlier on about, his numbers are going to increase based on the fact that he's going to be playing with better players than he ever has throughout any point in his career. Yeah. Like those Washington teams have been a struggle just to make the playoffs. And this was with John Wall, who was another great player at his prime in Washington. And look, we've seen Beal's usage go through the roof over the last couple of seasons without Wall, where he's been asked to carry the ball handling duties, the playmaking duties. He's been there, Jimmy Butler, with a 3-point shot. And that's why he is at the top of his game. That's why he has been an all-star over the last couple of seasons. I don't know. I'm just, again, we keep waffling between the decision. It's whether or not you're willing to sacrifice depth. The cost and the contract cost is something you do have to consider for a player that's better now and might be better over the next couple of seasons, but you're also sacrificing a big part of that, in your future and your depth and everything else in Tyler Herro. Yeah. And he's another player that they see lots of upside in. And
I think his upside is right, and they've said this, is right there with Devin Booker. I've got Devin Booker as the 17th best player in the NBA right now.
Better than Beal.
Much better than Beal. The thing with Bradley Beal is, like I said this before, he's not a great defender. I don't know that he ever will be. He's not a great playmaker. I know that people in Washington, he's gotten better as a pick and roll guy. Yeah, I guess. But even like Devin Booker is a much better playmaker than Bradley Beal is at this point. And I think the trajectory for Tyler Herro is to be a better playmaker than Bradley Beal is. I haven't seen Beal do it at a high level for a winning team yet. And at 28, going on 29 years old, that does matter for me. This is not a recent thing either. Beal is one of these guys who, despite putting up the big scoring numbers, has never really registered in MVP conversations or even first team, second team All NBA type guys, right? Like he's kind of empty stats is strong, but it's that kind of is how he's treated by the rest of the league. And again, like you look at just the numbers and the teams and all the advanced stats and all that kind of stuff. The numbers are really impressive and they're valuable. And maybe they would be super valuable on a team with depth and the talent that the Heat have, but it just hasn't translated to wins in his career. And that's not even an opinion. It's just a fact. And I think, and that's what causes me concern and a little hesitation about moving Tyler Herro. And all this conversation, again, before we hear it in the comment section about, I can't believe you think this player is better than Tyler Herro. You would trade Tyler Herro for that guy, whatever. The point is, Tyler Herro's ceiling is one of the best 20 players in the NBA. The question is, would you be willing to punt on that potential in order to try to win a championship sooner rather than later? And if the answer to that question for this Heat front office, not for you guys in the comments, for this Heat front office, if the answer to that question is yes, how good of a player does that player have to be in order for you to part with Tyler Herro's potential? Yeah. It's not a binary, right? It's not like, hey, we're going in the summer, we're trading Tyler Herro for the best player possible, period, end of story. It's, you got to weigh all of this. And my thing always is, if you trade Tyler Herro, you better be damn sure that you are becoming a championship favorite, that you are one of the favorites out of the Eastern Conference, one of the best 2 or 3 teams in the East, which based on Vegas's odds right now, the Heat are not. Okay, even though they're the number 1 seed. So those are the facts. It's out there. It would be a really hard decision to trade Tyler Herro. We're not saying that they should. I just thought it was a worthwhile exercise to go through. And
no. I mean, listen,
with Beal, it was worth having a conversation.
Even as you're talking about this, I'm thinking to myself, it's like, when have they made these moves in the past? Well, first of all, 1995, right? Pat Riley comes to this team. You've got one of the best scorers on the team, the best scorer on this team, one of the best shooters in NBA history, and Glenn Rice. What do? You trade him for your centerpiece, your building block, Alonzo Mourning, a disgruntled player, fits the total MO for what Pat has done throughout his whole career. Then from that point forward, you trade for another guy, an injured guy who's right in that right window. Tim Hardaway still has offensive potential, not happy in Golden State. They're looking to move on from him because they have concerns about his health. Pat believes that he could get him back to 100%, and he sure as hell does. And Tim Hardaway gets acquired for, again, another collection of young players. And then in 2010, like, it's not the same comparison, but you trade away. Oh, I'm sorry. What am I talking about? Before that, 2004, you trade away Lamar Odom, who wanted to come here and call Pat Riley a father figure. And you're like, oh, hey, sorry, son, off to LA with you. You trade away
Ryan Grant, Butler, Eddie Jones, Ryan Butler, all these guys. And for what you got, and you got Shaquille O'Neal. Why? Because you were certain that if you paired Shaq with a young D Wade, that you could go win a championship. And you were pretty sure that even though that team surprised, got into the playoffs with D Wade as a rookie, that team's ceiling probably wasn't championship. That's the difference with this team. I think that 04 team is probably the best comparison, because that was like, let's trade depth and good feels and promise and all this stuff for just like the superstar who can win us a championship. That's the difference between, I do think that this front office does believe this team can win a championship. But if they go into the playoffs this year and for something happens and they say, you know what, maybe we just can't, maybe no matter how deep we are and how well-rounded this team is and our top 10 offensive and defensive ratings and all that stuff, we just can't compete with Kevin Durant or Giannis. That if that is the thing, and somebody like Shaq, like that version of Shaq is available, somebody that can come available and say, you know what, if we acquire him, our ceiling has just jumped several notches to championship level. Yeah. Then I think the Heat have to consider it. That player, no matter what happens in the playoffs, will not be Bradley Beal.
You know what? That's a good way of looking at it. I'm thinking about this right now, like even in context of this team, I don't know that there is a single player on this roster that they wouldn't trade. Because even like if you could trade Bam Adebayo for Nikola Jokic, would you do it? The Heat front office.
I mean, most teams are like that, right? Unless you have Nikola Jokic or Joel Embiid or like that's
right.
I mean, that's how most teams are right now, and that sort of goes to that's the point, right? Is the Heat they just don't have that guy. They don't. I don't know if they need that guy. I just know they don't have that guy.
Well, it looks like we've gone a little long in this conversation talking about Bradley Beal and potential trade partners and everything else. Right now, Miami still looks like a very, very good team and a championship contending team. And if they win the title this year, then all of this becomes very moot. But it doesn't matter. That's something that, the gates were opened up by Shams Charania's report. We had to talk about it. It's not what we do. Remember that in the comments, people. And let us know if you think that we're right. If you agree, disagree, we want to hear from you. We always love hearing from you, whether or not you disagree with us. And as long as those comments are polite and productive, make sure to keep it here. As always, thank you so much for staying tuned to the show. We'll talk about Jimmy Butler's injury concerns, and we'll do a 10-game look ahead with 10 games left in the regular season, what Miami could do to tweak their late game offense concerns. We'll have a part 2 of this conversation that stemmed from the Bradley Beal talk coming up in another second episode. So make sure to check that one out as well. Make sure to continue making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Thanks so much for doing that. And make sure you make your second listen Locked On NBA. Locked On experts covering the biggest stories around the NBA every Monday through Friday in less than 30 minutes. It's free and available wherever you get podcasts. This is David Ramil signing off for now. Thanks so much for joining me, Wes.
Wrap it up, B.